Welcome to another chapter of the Crown podcast. You already know what I'm going to say. I say it on every single chapter. We have a very, very special guest today. I can't, you know, say it in any other way. It is what it is. I have amazing guests every single time. And today is no different. The lady that we have today is extremely inspirational. You don't have to look too far through her social media or her resume to know that she's extremely gifted. She's got a beautiful soul and a great asset for women, for young girls. And it's a pleasure to have her here today. She's an actor, she's a director, she's a creative. She uses storytelling to get across many messages in her life, her beliefs, and her faith, and a great follow on social media. Thank you, Candi Marie, for joining us on the Crown podcast.
It is an absolute privilege and honor to be here with you. And thank you for that great introduction. I'm like, who is this girl he's talking about? Wow. She's pretty cool.
It's totally deserved because you have quite an interesting story. It's kind of like a roller coaster, a lot of success, but also a lot of pain along the way. And sometimes both of them at the same time. If we could just start at the beginning of your story, you didn't have the best start. I feel that that's an important point to raise with our audience because a lot of people can identify with not having good starts and kind of feeling like there is nowhere to go from there. So if you can just, be so kind to tell us how your start, what was the inception of Candy Marie?
Candi Marie is a Southern belle from Jacksonville, Florida. I am the daughter of a young, poor white girl that didn't come from much. I'm also the daughter of a man that was born in the late 1930s that experienced racism on an unfathomable level in the South, in Georgia to be exact. And let's just say both of those worlds met. It was a world where they didn't like Black people, and a world where you had to be unapologetically Black, but at the same time, apologize for your Blackness. Um, so I am a result of that. I am a result of a girl who dropped out of middle school at 13 years old. I am the result of a Black man that was misunderstood in so many different ways. Um, that had to result to, unfortunately, selling drugs and um, went off to war and fought in a war and then came back and wasn't respected. Um, I'm a result of finding love in the most unusual places. I'm the third of six kids. The oldest girl. Um, yeah, I'm me.
And you've got I don't want to call it a strap line, but it's so powerful. From foster care to Hollywood.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that.
Well, I grew up in foster care for my entire childhood. I entered into the system when I was 7 years old. As a result of, like I said, having two parents that came from two totally different worlds, that just unfortunately, um, their worlds were so different that it just caused so much friction. It turned into abuse, and my mother suffered from schizophrenia. She was raped at 13 by her uncle and her cousin. Um, she dropped out of school, dealt with a lot, and they couldn't make ends meet. They we were poor, we were dirt poor, we were sleeping in vans. And my parents just couldn't take care of me. They did the best they could. They loved me so much, but I guess, oh my goodness, I don't know why sometimes it's just so hard to tell your story. Like, you can listen and you can hear everybody else's, but sometimes it's not always easy to share yours. So thank you. It's and storytelling is so interesting. So yeah, I grew up rough. I know what it feels like to be alienated for being poor. I know what it feels like to be the one that everybody walked around in school. Me and my siblings were called the dirty kids. We were outcasts. Nobody wanted to sit next to us. People said we smelled bad. Um, there were some stints where we were even homeless. But interestingly enough, we were still happy because we had each other. But to society standards, we didn't have much, but I didn't know that it was that bad until other people told me. Um, I wore my brother's hand-me-downs until I think I was about 7 years old. Like, I dressed like a little boy because, again, we did the best we could. But the one thing that I will say is that my mother always said, "I love you." She always said, "I love you." And then one day, um, my world changed forever. When I was 7 years old, we went into the foster care system, and I ended up in a home that was extremely abusive, mentally and physically abusive. Um, but through everything, there was always this light that I felt like I could connect to. I always knew that there was something on the other side of all of the turmoil and the pain. And I would dream literally out of my situation. It was just like I would go into these moments where I would just like, I don't know, maybe it was seeing God's plan for my life. And I just always had this connection to God. And it was just like, no matter what I was going through, no matter the abuse, um, I always knew that this wasn't going to be my forever. Um, so chasing those dreams slowly but surely, I never gave up on those dreams. And being the third out of 6 kids, I was also a motivator. I was also the encourager. And I was still very much like the black sheep of my family. I would often say to my friends, "Why did God make me different? Why is it that" I don't know, I always felt like I was mentally stronger, or like I could just take a little more, or I would take it and you would never truly know how I felt because I kept it in or I kept it to myself. And I grew up having to be so many things to so many people. Even in my foster home, it was like I was always forced into a position of leadership, even though I wasn't the oldest or I wasn't the number one choice. I wasn't being led. It was just, I don't know, it was just like this feeling inside of me. And again, it's God. Like I know now that it was God. And I always just wanted to try my best. Like, I remember when I was like 8 years old, I got an award for I try my best. That was the award. I try my best. I guess I was just always just happy to be wherever I was, you know?
We've just had a chapter with a wonderful gentleman, Jerry Henderson, and if you can, please go back and listen. His story is so moving, and you just wonder how much the human spirit can take, right? And you hear this gentleman speak today, he's just full of love after going through so much pain. And when I hear your story, um, it brings that same energy with it, where it's like, okay, there's got to be a silver lining. There's got to be a silver lining. How much can one person go through? You didn't choose your beginnings. Now, it's one thing, to grow up in a good environment and then make a rebellious choice and choose something beneath you, but you didn't get to choose your inception, your beginnings, and so that's what makes it even more admirable where your story went from there, because you had to choose a better path for yourself when you didn't even know what a better path was. And so just tell me a bit about, how acting came about for you and why did you choose performance?
Well, interestingly enough, I have this thing that I say that I had to dream outside of the walls that were created to box me in. And I felt like that's what foster care was. I felt like being in that home with all those kids and being around so many people that it just felt like so much pain was just always around me. So I always tried to just be this light. So I would watch TV shows and I would pretend as if I was the main character in those shows. And then I would also I had this composition book and I would create television shows just from watching it, just because I felt like I didn't see a lot of foster kids on TV. I didn't really see a lot of people who reflected my story. It was always the negative or the bad orphan, or it just wasn't, it didn't feel true. Um, so that's kinda like how that came about, and I ended up going to a school of the arts, and that was the first time that I saw young brown and black faces, like, performing and in the theater, and a lot of my friends, were actors, and I would ask questions, so it would just be like little seeds that would, be planted. And then eventually, when I went off to high school, so many of my friends, they were in a nursing program, and I just felt like that wasn't for me. And I was in this nursing class, and we had to actually act out some of, I guess, just the language and some of the scenarios that would happen in a hospital. And when I acted out those scenes and she actually put them on camera, I did extremely well. And the entire class would just be in awe, and they would, like, laugh at me, and I would just literally like, I would always go to this place, like, I felt my imagination just take over, and I would go into this place, and I would just get lost in this feeling and in this emotion. And then when I went off to college, I told myself, "This is my opportunity to start completely over," and basically, when I was 18 years old, in the state of Florida, when you graduate from high school, as a foster youth, you get a free ride. So I got a free ride to college, and I went to college for free, and I felt like that was an opportunity for me to really find out who I was, to go after all of those dreams that I had always knew that I could do, and I use acting and modeling to put myself through college outside of, getting that free ride. I use acting and modeling to pay for my bills, to pay for just everything else, my books, everything. And I would literally be a full-time student and also a full-time model, and I would drive around the state of Florida to Miami and Tampa and Orlando and wherever else, and I would shoot national commercials, and it just kind of became a part of my story and my reputation because I was actually really good at it. And it kind of reminds me of this phrase that I heard, the thing that you do with the least amount of effort. A man that I'm going to bring up very soon in my story. And I told myself, well, you know what? Maybe I really can do this because I'm actively putting one foot in front of the other and I'm making it happen. And then when I graduated from college, I met a gentleman. I applied to work for Walt Disney World, and there was this program called Steve Harvey's Disney Dreamers Academy. And I told myself that I was gonna I was gonna go and I was gonna see if they needed any volunteers or if they needed any speakers because I had gotten to a point also where I was starting to share my story. I went from a place of being so ashamed of who I was. Like when I was in high school, I never told people that I was in foster care. Like when counselors would come to the office, I would hide because I didn't want that to be attached to me. I was class president in high school. I went out for homecoming. I did all the things, but I didn't want that label because I felt like I didn't want anybody to pity me. I didn't want anybody to look down on me. And it wasn't cool to be somebody who grew up in foster care. So I always tried to do the opposite of what that stigma was that was attached to that label. I decided that I was going to create my own name and my own label. So when I got to the place where I started to own who I was and where I came from, that was in college. Somebody asked me, they said, "What's the worst thing that you ever went through?" And I thought about it was growing up in foster care. It was being snatched away from my parents. It was living in a home where I was taught to be to shrink. I had the worst foster mom, and I had to gain understanding about who she was for me to heal from that experience. But it just felt like my foster mother did everything to break me. And I didn't understand it, I didn't get it, and I didn't understand why, like, would you take in kids and then in turn treat them this way? But of course, hurt people. You know, that is the phrase that so many of us know and have heard of, but I mean, it really is true. But learning her story helped me to also heal parts of my story. So I started to take that same story and I started to speak at different group homes and foster homes. And when I approached the woman that was in charge of that program for Disney Dreamers Academy, I told myself, I'm ready to tell my story. And when I met her, she was a Black woman. She asked me to come by her office and she said, I want to know what your story is. So I ended up going to her office and I told her my story. And I told her, I said, I grew up in foster care and I'm a motivational speaker. And, I put myself through school and I've done modeling and acting, but now I want to be a teen talk show host. Like, how do I really make a difference in the lives of young people that look like me? And she said, I have somebody I want to introduce you to. So she chooses me to be her assistant. Let me add that. She chooses me to be her assistant of that entire program. And the person that she wants to introduce me to is Steve Harvey and his manager. And meeting her, I didn't know that my life would change forever. That is one of the people that literally changed the trajectory of my life. So the weekend of the event comes, and she introduces me to Steve Harvey's manager. And a voice inside of me says, don't leave here without getting their information. It was a 4-day event. Every single day, I'm working my butt off. I'm working to be the best assistant that I can be. I'm making sure every single day that I make contact with them. The very last day of the event, I approached Mr. Harvey's manager and I said, Mr. Rashawn McDonald, I would love to stay in touch with you. Can I have your email? Can I have your phone number? And he gives it to me. I called him every single Monday for 2 months and he didn't answer me. Every single Monday. And he didn't answer my emails or my calls. And then out of the blue, one day he calls me and he leaves a voicemail. I missed the call completely. And he says, Candace, this is Rashawn McDonald, the manager to Steve Harvey, executive producer of da 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 da. Call me back, girl. And when I tell you I just lost it, I was like, oh my God, I gotta call him back. And I finally call him back and he ended up mentoring me for a year and a half. Year and a half, he mentored me. One day comes along, um, and actually, let me back up just for 1 second because some really, really big events happened. A young Black 15-year-old boy was murdered in Sanford, Florida, and his name was Trayvon Martin. I lived 15 minutes from where he was killed. And while I was being mentored, I lived in Florida at the time. And I literally went to all of the marches, this young girl going to all these marches, taking footage, getting interviews, talking to all of these people. So when they talked about the Trayvon Martin murder on the Steve Harvey Morning Show, they would send people to YouTube to look at my footage because I was there, I was on the ground, I was listening to all of these leaders from Martin Luther King to Jesse Jackson to every prominent Black leader that you can think of. I was right there on the ground, capturing, talking to the people. And that is what that is the one thing that helped create the opportunity for me. So when an opportunity opened up for the morning show, they called me and they offered me the job. And I had 2 days to get to Atlanta, Georgia. They said, "Hey, the job starts on Monday. Can you get here?" I dropped everything and I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And moving to Atlanta, Georgia is what changed my life. I started working there and I made it very clear I want to be a talk show host. This is what I want to do. So they started to slowly give me opportunities. Mr. Harvey would have every name that you could think of on the air. And The first opportunity that they gave me was there was a 007 James Bond movie, and they said, "Okay, go and cover this movie. We can put the content on the website." My very first celebrity interview was Montel Jordan, and it just felt like after doing it once, it was like a fire lit inside of me, and more opportunities coming.
This is how we do it. Oh, this is how we do it.
This is how we do it,
Mhm.
literally. This is how we do it, literally, and I became the very first correspondent of the Steve Harvey Morning Show, literally. I've interviewed every single name you can think of, from Oprah to Tony Braxton to Babyface to Magic Johnson, just and this was at the prime. Like, literally, when Steve Harvey was at his prime, I was working for them. And out of a need to wanna be the best, I told myself, "Well, maybe I should take acting classes. I'm in Atlanta. I think taking acting classes is gonna make me a better personality." You know, I thought I had a great personality, but I felt like I need to be a little more polished, step out of my comfort zone. I need to learn a little bit of improv. So I started searching for classes. And lo and behold, I find a teacher by the name of Sean Middlebrook, who was the assistant casting director to Tyler Perry Studios. And he was a phenomenal teacher. And that's when I fell in love with acting. I fell in love with acting when I started taking acting classes while I was a TV host out of a need to want to strengthen and sharpen the tool that I was already actively pursuing. And he told me, he said, "You're actually really good at this." um, and after working in Atlanta for 4 years and taking acting classes and starting to become also one of the face of the brand for Steve Harvey, Mr. Harvey and my mentor, Rashawn McDonald, they came to me and they said, "Kid, it's time for you to take your talents to the next level. We think you should move to LA." So I did it. I did it. I moved to LA. And while I was working for Steve Harvey, there was something else that I did. I created my own positive media company. And it was literally, we were before our time. We were before Shade Room. We were before literally what so many of these media companies are doing. I was one of the very first to do it, and I got to a point where I had over 30 contributors across the country working for my company, and my mentor, Rashawn McDonald, and Shirley Strawberry, who was also one of the personalities for the morning show, they were my mentors over my company. So they basically said, "Run your company the way we run the morning show." And I did. And it was growing so fast. And yeah, I ended up moving to LA. And the thing that changed when I moved to LA was that I was in LA by myself. I didn't have no family. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have my mentors. You know, I had them. They were a phone call away, but it was like an opportunity for me to pivot, and I had to start all over. You know, so I went from being that it girl in Atlanta to now a nobody in LA with a mattress on the floor with no real income. I have this media company that I'm funding out of my own pocket. My bank account is slowly getting down to the negative. And it's like, what do you do? I'm in an apartment, sharing an apartment with like six other people. And I fell into the biggest depression of my life. Another thing that was also happening in my life was that I was also engaged through a lot of that. And I ended up getting married for 6 months and it didn't work out. So moving to LA was like starting completely over. Who I was, everything that I knew. Um, and I hit rock bottom. I fell into a really, really dark depression. And I wondered, coming to LA, was this really a good choice? Like, it was comfortable in Atlanta. Did I make the right choice? And there was this one day, it was really, really dark. A lot of people don't know this. Um, I had got fired for the first time from a job where I was cocktail waitressing in LA. And I got fired. I was only there for 3 months and I got fired and it was my only means of income. And I had just moved into this apartment by myself. I went from living with 6 people and then I moved into this apartment by myself. And a week after I move in, I get fired. And I hit rock bottom in a way that I had never hit rock bottom before. And I'm going to share something that a lot of people don't know, but I struggled with suicide. I did. It got really, really dark. And I just felt like, I told myself when I was growing up and after I'd reached all that success that I would never, ever, ever go back to the space that I had been in when I was in foster care or when I lived with my biological parents of not having anything. And, I always prided myself on being a go-getter because I had that fuel. I had all of that passion to keep me going. And I sat in that apartment, my lights cut off, no food in my refrigerator, literally my bank account in the double negative, just sitting there wondering, like, who do I call? Like, I don't have family to go back to. Like, what do I do? I don't have a home to go back to. If this fails, I fail.
I just want to jump in right there because I think this is such a crucial part of the story, right? You see, there is a link, and I've been listening, and you, when you described your childhood, you said that you always had to be the one for everything, for everyone, right? And you always believed that you were like the one. Then you later on described the one as like the black sheep. But then what's interesting is when you started watching TV, you always tried to be the one, the lead character. And because that's all you've known, you're the one. In many cases, that is seen as being the strong one. You've always had to bounce back from adversity. And so now, this part of the story where you hit your rock bottom, or what you think at that time is your rock bottom, because I know there's more to your story and some really, really painful things, later on down the line. But you hit this rock bottom and you rightfully ask, like, where do I go? Where does this strong one lean? How do I process my own pain? Because you're so used to processing and helping everyone else's. This ties in beautifully with acting because I grew up and I did acting and went to drama school and then fell in love with scripts. This is long before I was a writer, right? And there was something about acting that I really liked. And I think it was for a young child who goes through difficult things, children live in their imaginations. But for a child who's gone through really hard times and not known that it's hard, the nervous system processes that. And then there's this escape that we want to do. And we have this kind of like fantasy world where we have to create a new world somewhere else because something doesn't fit about this current world. And when you get into acting, you're auditioning, and each time you audition, it's a new person you have to play. And in a way, it's kind of like a break from having to be yourself, and you get to embody someone else's story because you may not understand your own. If
Yeah,
I asked you to play play you, you may not know how to do it, But I tell you to play someone else, and
yeah,
it's it's easy. And so, just want to kind of pull on. That's not just something that's exclusive to actors. I think we all
right.
are playing characters. I think Will Smith said it once on The Breakfast Club about once he became Will and the lovable character that everyone just fell in love with, he had to keep being that because that's what everyone wanted from him. And in a way, we do that with our friends and our family and our colleagues. We give them what we have to. We change, based on who we're around. We adapt, and I just wonder for you, do you think that there was some kind of parallel between your life and the fact that you wanted to play characters?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because what happens on the other side of being in that dark place is going to completely blow your mind. Literally. So I'm sitting in that room and I have a knife ready to just end it all. And I hear God tell me, make a choice right here in this moment. So I chose not to do it. Later in that day, I got a phone call from a casting director that wanted me to audition for a movie that was about foster care. And it was a massive movie, a massive movie. And she thought of me for the role because I told her my story. We had lunch, and she said, "Tell me your story." So as she's reading the script, she reads this character, and it reminds her of me. That movie was called Instant Family. It came out in 2018 with Mark Wahlberg, Octavia Spencer, Rose Byrne, some of the biggest names in the industry at the time. And literally, all I had to do was be myself. And what I've learned as an actress, like literally, your job is to tell the truth, right? And when I think about the greats, when I think about the Denzels, when I think about the Viola Davises, the Octavia Spencers, the Mark Wahlbergs of the world, literally, we just get to see so many different versions of them. They're telling their truth, they're listening and they're responding, right? And although it is a character, you are that character, right? And I'm actually filming a movie on Wednesday, tomorrow. um, I'm filming a movie where I'm a cop, I'm a detective, and I end up getting shot, but I do survive. And a- in crafting and preparing for this role, a lot of it is really just like, Candy, how can you tell the truth? How can you take this story and tell the best story through your lens? Literally, like even when you're auditioning as an actress, everybody gets these different sides, but the person who gets the role is the one who could tell the best story. And that's what it's all about, the preparation that you put in, the time that you put in, the way that you take those words and you regurgitate like, it's all who can tell the best story, who can tell their truth. And that's what I've realized with every single character. I did a horror film this summer where for the first time I played the antagonist and I had to kill a man with a hammer. And again, I had to find my connection. How can I connect to this character? Like how can I do that? So it's really cool because I get to explore different versions of me, and it's like this is the one place where it's safe to do this.
And that's a key word, safe. For a lot of people, um, when you're on the outside and you listen to a story like this, it can feel like it can feel like entertainment because this is what we're used to hearing on TV. But if people were to actually turn the mirror around and look at their own story, it would also sound like a fantasy story because we've all been through stuff. And I think what was so powerful about yours is that the same thing that I said was a tough beginning ended up being the light that propelled you, having to do that foster movie. And so it is, I'm glad you had that choice. I'm glad you made that choice when you had the two choices. Um, but what's really interesting is when you think about society today, there are a lot of people we can speak about people who have come from foster backgrounds, or people who are in it now, young people who may share the same experience as you. And it's such an inspiration to see, you know, the that silver lining, that light that I was able to turn something that was very painful and could have been seen as very sinister and very helpless and hopeless, turn it into something beautiful, something that can inspire the next generation, which I know something you're very passionate about in your origins and your family. And it's, I want this to be a moment of inspiration, but also a moment of encouragement for anyone who's listening right now. Um, that your story, you always hear me say it, this is not how your story ends, but you're not necessarily always going to be tied to where you came from. And we don't get to choose many things in life, where we're born, our parents, our setup, the schools we go to, our early experiences. And if you've had a difficult beginning, I want this to encourage you today that, things can change and all things work out to the good. You just got to keep on going. And the key part of Candy's story that you have to partner with the keep on going, and that is the story. It's painful sometimes to carry these stories, the secrets, the skeletons, I call them in Crown. It's painful, it's hard. You don't want to be judged, you don't want to feel weak, you don't want to be up against someone else in an interview who isn't got as much going on as you. You don't want to take away any advantage from yourself or give advantage to somebody else. But the story is what set Candy free twice. First with the Steve Harvey, second with this lady, and her story was remembered. And in that moment when she shared it, she was put into the casting for something that she couldn't see in the future, something that she couldn't see ahead of her. There was no hope in that moment. She was at rock bottom. But her story, it reminds me of a scripture: your gift will make room for you. And that's what happened in that moment, even though you couldn't see it in that moment. And so, just like many of our listeners right now, you may not be able to see a way out. You may not be able to see a hope, but it doesn't mean that in sharing and opening up. I know we are like 40 minutes in. The topic today, ladies and gentlemen, is it's okay to talk. Don't suffer in silence. And we've used this story today to illustrate that it was the sharing of the story that opened up the unfathomable doors that came after. And I kind of want to talk a bit about that. You know what it's like being in foster and the stigma around that. And so not everyone is like you where they believe they are the one. They believe that they have something about them. Some of them may be going through that now, and they may have different types of coping mechanisms than you had. You channeled yours into the arts and into learning and to networking. And for others, it's not that. That's not their reality. Um, Now, I think it's also unfair to say, well, no, they've just got to choose something different. How do we break down some of these stigmas um, about foster kids and people who come up in the care system? There are a lot of stigmas that surround it. And what do you think some of the ways that we can help?
Um, well, I think the storytellers are such a big part of that. The way our culture is shaped. Um, if there's something that you don't know, I highly recommend that we educate ourselves, that we gain our own understanding. We read, or even go to a group home and spend some time with these kids. Hear it from the mouth of these kids, or even just observe, and just take them in. Be present in that moment. Put your phone down, and just spend some time with them. I think for me growing up, that was one of the things I treasured the most when people really cared. They weren't just doing it just for a check or because they wanted to benefit from the movement, but because they really cared. And we live in such a society today where there are so many distractions. Just be present in the moment and take in what's really happening, right? And I think that we're all so gifted and we have so many different just talents. How can you contribute? The secret to life is the feeling, and I believe that with everything inside of me, you know. Um, relatability too. I think that for every person, it's different. It just depends on who the person is. But at least for me, it's more about like how can we just be present in the moment, right? How can we show up? Sometimes all it takes is for a person to just show up. I've had the privilege of advocating for children in foster care for quite some time now. I just hosted a gala and we raised over $700,000 in one night for youth that are aging out, teenagers that are aging out of the system. And the one thing that I always say is thank you for showing up. I understand we all come from different backgrounds and some people just can't relate. They don't get it. Cool. I'm not here to condemn you, but there's nothing wrong with taking the necessary steps to gain understanding. Educate yourself. See how you could help the problem or maybe how you are a part of the problem, how you might be enabling the problem. Who are the leaders that we're voting for? The way that we vote, the way we show up in our communities, everything contributes, in the education system, everything. I mean, literally, it's all connected. How are you showing up for the people around you? Because if it's not foster care, it's kinship care. Just because you went to live with your grandmother, still a form of foster care. We just call it something different. So I think also just as a people, we need to learn how to normalize these terms and not alienate. We're so quick to judge and alienate. That's one thing that people can do is to gain understanding because once you do that, you realize that we're really not all that different.
Mm. And in most cases, many, many cases, like the case of yours, you're actually a lot more resilient and creative and powerful. And despite what may be seen as a disadvantage for many, I know many have good experiences too, but there are many who don't, but it still can shape them to being something incredible and they shouldn't lose out on opportunities because of that. And which I know happens.
Can I say this? Can I say this? Growing up in foster care is my greatest superpower. It is my greatest superpower. I now know that. I know that now because
Mhm. And do you see how the perspective has changed though?
it's
You know?
shifted,
Right.
it has completely shifted. But again, sometimes you have to get out of that environment, that is crippling you, that is disabling you and telling you what you are and what you're not. You got to completely remove yourself and you have to shift to somewhere else. Um, I wanna say this really, really quickly because this is also a very big part of my story. Um, I'm the only one of my siblings that made it outside of our community, or some people might call it the hood. And I recently lost my little brother to gun violence a year ago. And if only he knew how great he was outside of that environment. Like I wish he could see himself the way that I did. And I say that about so many different people, like sometimes our environment is what is really crippling us and holding us back. And I will not stop fighting. I will not stop creating. I will not stop being great until I have completely shifted the lives of everyone around me just by doing myself. Like when you heal yourself, you heal your family, and then you heal your community. But it first starts with you. I know that every generation after me will forever be changed because of the decisions that I made. And sometimes that's all it takes is just one. That's it.
You've made a lot of really powerful decisions, and it's great to see confirmation of I took the right path. I made the right choice. I'm so glad I listened and I went to LA. To see what could have seemed like a bad idea once it fell through, you actually can now see the bigger picture and how it all connects and how it was all important. Um, but your early life forced you to be resilient, forced you to be strong. And that's like many people who listen today. Um, they're the strong one. And so they never know who to turn to in their time of need. And this holds us back as well because we then start to we go through loads of traumas in life and we never express them. And it's known very widely today as mental and emotional health. And so that's something we're really passionate about on Crown. And I just want to use this moment as a encouragement and a teaching moment that it's okay to talk, and the second part of that is don't suffer in silence, because this is what happens when you're the strong one. We have kind of defined the word strong as enduring, endurance, but it's not the same thing. To continue pressing on is not what makes you strong. To heal is what makes you strong. But in order to heal, you have to feel. And the word you used earlier, feeling, the feelings that we give and we share, and most importantly, that we process for ourselves. But sometimes it's too much for you to just process by yourself. Everyone needs someone. And so today, this chapter is really dedicated to everyone that's a strong one that doesn't have someone to lean on in their lives or hasn't felt as though they have someone, hasn't you potentially used the people who they do have in their lives, or maybe you haven't given space to someone to be open with their story. Maybe there is another success story in someone else who's just waiting for your story. Maybe the story that you need to hear can propel you have the tools to propel them to another level. Or maybe your story needs to be heard. Wherever you are, it may not be your story. It may just be you saying, I need help. You know, I want to use today as a reminder and an encouragement that it's okay to do that. But yes, don't suffer in silence. What you think's actually happening is being strong. But what is really happening is suffering. Because if you have to put on a brave face and wear a mask and act another role and show up every single day despite what you're going through, that means you don't belong. There's no safe place for you. And when there's no safe place, you're in survival mode. When you're in survival mode long enough, you become someone else. When you become that new person, you're no longer yourself. You're just who you've had to be. And then that's the person that shows up in the world. And then you hit glass ceilings because it requires authenticity. That next level, the rooms that Candy is going into doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by luck or just hard work or, talent and skill. To sustain a career in these industries, to do what I do, it requires consistency. It requires authenticity. You can't fake it for this long. And so if you're not able or you're not willing to face yourself, you've heard me talk about it in Crown, the reflections, the mirrors, the glass. At some point, you have to face yourself and you have to be honest with yourself and say, you know, I'm not where I want to be, or I don't like how I feel. I need help. I don't want to suffer anymore. And everyone has different, beliefs and faiths. But I know for you, your relationship with God is an important one. And so, can you touch a bit on that? And just the whole idea of choosing that when was that enough is enough? I don't want to suffer anymore because you've mentioned your brother, and I find it really hard to read, that we look through the stories and see the story, and it's very painful and it's sad because just like you, the first thing I think of is, man, we don't know who that could have been. We don't know who that is. It's been taken away, and so I thank you for sharing such a vulnerable moment. And to go back to what strength is, it's vulnerability. Because as Candy shares that, as painful as it is, every time she shares it, she gets stronger and stronger, and she gets closer to her authentic self. And it's the authentic self and the authenticity and the consistency that allows her to enter into those rooms. And not everyone wants to be an entertainer, but your authenticity will allow you to leave the room that you're in right now. And if that's a dark, heavy, caged prison because you're afraid of getting your heart broken, or you're afraid of stepping out, or you have the anxiety against the world and you don't want the pain to happen again, and you live in this survival place and this fear, I encourage you today to step out, see what's on the other side. And so, yeah, can you just talk a bit about your faith and how that sustained you and what it's meant to you, as you've come into this and you've seen it's a roller coaster, like I said at the beginning. You don't just arrive and stay up there. Life keeps lifing.
The one consistent thing that I've always felt in my life is that God chose me, and then I chose God back. And the first sign of God's love that I can remember was I was like 5 years old and I walked into the ocean. My mom was a young mom and she told my brothers to watch me, and they didn't because they were 7 and 9. And I just remember a wave hitting me, and it was like I disappeared and I just saw a white light. And then when I came out of the water, everybody was asking, "Where have you been? Where have you been? We've been trying to find you." And I just remember that white light. It was beautiful. And I just remember so many occurrences, even growing up in foster care, where God would plant certain dreams and visions in my, and I would always be able to see them. And I just thought that I was dreaming. I didn't know that literally this was a spiritual gift that God was giving me. And the gift just started to continue to strengthen. And I just remember being like that little kid at church, 13 years old, standing up because I just was and so enthralled with the praise and the worship. It just did something to my spirit. Just something about I just always had a connection to it. I just could never ever explain it. And Ended up having 2 major losses back to back. Uh, my mom, who I'd been looking for since I was 13 years old, I got news that she had died, and I thought that I had so much time to find my mom, and my mom was like she was like the thing that kept me going. She was like the other side. All of this is gonna be worth it when that one day I meet my mom and I tell her everything that I've become. Mom, I've done this, I've done that, I did this, I did that, you know? Because she was the first person to ever truly get me to understand that love was a verb. The first person for me to that really like I just whenever I thought about love, because I never been told that I was loved when I grew up in foster care. Never. Never got hugs, but I always remembered my mom taught me how to love. So I would then teach my siblings how to love. I would always tell them I love you. And losing her and mourning her death, and then my brother getting killed a year later, those two back to back losses was hard. It was like I was back at rock bottom all over again. But losing my brother was like losing my child. It was like I had literally had my wound completely torn out of me because my brother literally grew up as my son. He had been my son since I was 6 years old. He made me a big sister. And I had just talked to him a few days before. So it was like God was like, I got you. Like it was like I went through the worst of the worst of the worst. And then it was like God gave me a rebirth. It's like I've been completely born again, and he allowed me to see my brother in my dreams. Like I've had so many beautiful encounters with my brother. Like I can't even explain. I've never experienced anything like it. And for God to pull me and deliver me from this kind of pain, like God literally delivered me. There was just so many occurrences. He placed some beautiful women in my life. I'm a part of this amazing Bible study group, and the way they showed up for me, all of it was just different examples of God's love. And all I could think was like, this is you're literally God in human form. You're literally God in human form. And God loved me so much that he just never gave up on me and he never turned his back on me. And like so many unanswered questions that I had, the way that God answered them in the spirit and in the physical. And then also like in order for me to survive my brother's death, I started to study spirit and I started to listen to all these different spiritual leaders, and the type of understanding that I gained, I truly understand who I am. And I'm not this rented body. That's not who I am. Like I truly understand, and God wakes me up every day, not the alarm clock. That's where I'm at now in my life, where I get up every day 4:35 a.m. even when I don't even want to. It happens. But it's just all because just I was open and I said yes. And I think that sometimes you have to be open to it. Another thing that I also had to realize, because even though I loved God, I always had a hard time trusting him. And I asked God, I said, why can't I trust you? Why can't I wholeheartedly trust you? And I can't even tell you how this was revealed to me, but he took me back to my origin story. And I realized the reason why I have a hard time trusting God is because the very foundations of the people who were meant to parent me were my biological mother and my father. And because they broke so many promises and I didn't trust them, and they were the first example, and then you have God the Father, that's why I have a hard time trusting Him. And that literally was just revealed to me about 2 months ago. But that has completely shifted me in my relationship, because what I know for sure is these are two totally different things. God the Father and the Spirit is not my Father in the flesh. and the sacrifices and the ways that he's delivered me. And it was just like God took me through these moments that they were like fast forwarded moments where God was just showing me how he just delivered me and how he loved me. And it was just all in a matter of like seconds. I can't even explain it. But it was like God was like, "You're about to experience a shift." And he did. And I think the biggest form of God's love, and I'm going to say this, but God showed me my brother in angel form. And what I realized was that, like, an angel is literally just the perfect version of yourself, perfect version of you. And when I saw my brother in my dream and he was just so perfect, but he was still him, he still dressed like himself, he still had the same personality, but he was just perfection, just personified. I was like, wow, this is the best gift ever. Like, let me see one of the people that I love more than anything in this world. To see him, I was like, that is a gift from God. How can I ever be the same?
And that goes back to what I said earlier about, like, I know God communicates with everyone differently, meets you where you're at. And I said, for people who, have a reality that they want to escape, that place may be somewhere magical. I call it Narnia. That's my place, right?
Love it. Hmm.
Everything's Narnia to me. Um, so God could have like made your earth circumstances beautiful, but he probably knows that nothing would move you here because you've been hurt here. So he had to meet you where you were at in your space. And the only way he could show you that type of peace was to show you your brother. And I think that's beautiful. Um, it's very encouraging. And, you know, keep the faith, keep the faith. And there are many people listening to this who, some may have a faith, some may not. But just to know that there is a hope, just to see your story, hear your story. Um, we get to the part of the chapter now where I want you to envision a person. Okay. This person could be listening right now, or they may listen in a future now. Um, but they're in a difficult situation. Maybe they come from the foster system. Maybe they don't. Maybe they've just grown up, as you said, with an aunt or an uncle or even their own family, their own parents, and not had the best start. Or maybe they had a great start and then life didn't go the way they planned. And they're in that place where you spoke about, a very, very sensitive place that we're not afraid or ashamed to speak about on the Crown podcast. And that's being in the space of not wanting to be here anymore, thinking that that's the way out. Um, I'd like you to speak to that person now, you know, who's at that point and they can't see that light, that opportunity, that things can get better. If you'd be so kind to bless us um, as we conclude this chapter, what would your advice be to that person listening right now?
I get it. I know it sucks right now, but there is beauty on the other side. I know that this feels like the worst thing in the world that you're going through, but the way that this is going to strengthen you in ways that you can't even imagine. It's going to be that armor that you need. And you're going to be able to look back at this moment and you're going to say, because of that, now I can. Because of, and not to mention, you're going to be a badass. You are going to literally be able to take on anything because you've earned your stripes, you've earned your ability to you're resilient, you can bounce back. Like, these are the things that make us durable. These are the things that allow us to continue to go. And I know it sucks right now, but if you can just allow yourself to get to the other side of this, when you close your eyes and when you open them in the morning, you will be just fine. You will be okay. You Just allow yourself to get to the other side. Um, Comparison is the thief of joy. It truly is. But if you can just get to the other side, you will experience that joy.
Thank you so much. And a big part of getting to that other side is having the courage, to be strong. And the strong we're talking about is vulnerable, being able to speak out, to tell your story, to speak your truth. If you need help, ask for help. You do not have to carry everything by yourself. If you don't have a family, turn to God. If you do have a family, turn to God. But use the people in your circle, create a network. A theme that's been coming up quite a lot is support networks, surrounding yourself with people who have been through what you are going through. Find yourself a local support if it's grief that you're dealing with, if it's, you know, childhood trauma, if it's alcoholism or drugs or whatever it may be that you are struggling with today. Find people in that community. And it's a lot easier today because we have social media. There are groups, there are blogs, there are people who out there looking for more people. There are people out there looking for you. They want to be a part of your network. And just you need to align yourself with um, the kind of future that you want to have. And as you do that, you will start to attract certain things in your life. And those small little puzzle pieces, I always call them pixels. Those pixels, as you put them together, they start to make the full picture. And each step you get another blessing and another blessing until before you know it, you're not in the dark anymore. But it starts with having the courage to step out. And it's okay to talk. You don't have to suffer in silence.
Also, I highly recommend find your thing. Find your thing that sets your soul on fire, the thing that makes you feel something. I know for me, just connecting with nature has become an adventure for me. Like I chase waterfalls now. Like I'm on this mission to literally find the most phenomenal waterfalls in the world. And even if I'm going on this venture by myself, I'm doing that for me. Find ways to fall in love with you all over again. Because sometimes it's not always easy to explain the way you feel to people because you feel misunderstood. And I completely relate to that. So find new ways to fall in love with you.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful way to end. Find new ways to fall in love with you. Thank you so much. Your story is very impactful. You've shared a lot of wonderful things. It's been a pleasure to have you today.
Happy to be here. Absolute pleasure to be here.
That concludes another chapter of the Crown podcast. And we hope you've been inspired, encouraged. For more information on my guest, you can check out all the links in the description. Until next time, stay blessed, and I wish you better days.